Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the live online news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday the 1st of July 2021. We're broadcasting live from Dublin, Dundalk and Longford, and we are your hosts Finbar Markey and Anna Kavanagh. Thanks for tuning in, folks. It's hard to believe it's the 1st of July already. It only seems like last month that we were taking down the Christmas decorations. In case we don't see our viewers in the US today before the big day, have a great 4th of July and don't celebrate too hard. On tonight's show, Anne is joined by Mattie McGrath TD to talk about vaccine passports and all things COVID. I'll be talking with Professor Josep Costa, former Vice President of the Catalan Parliament, about the recent release of political prisoners by Spain. Anna will also be bringing us her weekly news and views. But before any of that, let's take a look at the news that you won't see on TV. In Irish news first, and some of the highest paid civil servants in Ireland will be receiving another pay hike from today of 2%. This is on top of a 2% pay hike last October and another hike planned for this coming autumn. As Ireland teeters on economic ruin, the governing classes remain unaffected and indeed are experiencing personal financial improvements as they today receive that 2% pay rise. Senior civil servants, TDs and senators, in fact all civil servants earning between 70 and 150,000 euros per annum, are to see salary increases of 2%, the increase being presented as a restoration of cuts from 2008. As inflation continues to grow in Ireland, the ESB, the largest supplier of electricity and a semi-state company, has announced plans to increase the price of domestic electricity by 9% and gas by almost 8% from the 1st of August. Irish households have seen their domestic bills rise significantly in several areas over the last year, with many, if not most, homes experiencing a reduction in income due to COVID restrictions. Other electricity suppliers have raised their prices this year, and the rise by the ESB will mean another 1 million customers seeing a significant jump in their bills. A recent report by inish.org investigating derelict buildings in and around Cork City have found there to be currently over 400 derelict buildings within a radius of 2 kilometres from the city centre. Many of the buildings were residential homes. The original report, brought out in 2020, found that at the time that there were 340 derelict buildings within that 2 kilometre radius. This is despite the fact that the local authority had only 95 derelict buildings registered in their official files. Since the publication of the report, another 60 derelict buildings have been identified within that area, according to inish. Such an amount of empty buildings in the belly of a housing crisis is at the very least incompetence. Inish have called on Cork City Council to eradicate dereliction of buildings in the city. The Secretary of the Irish Fishing and Seafood Alliance, Cormac Burke, has described the performance of the Sea and Fisheries Protection Authority, the SFPA, as the Oireachtas Committee hearing this week as arrogant. The SFPA is the official body tasked with enforcing the regulations in the fishing industry, but has been under the spotlight itself and heavily criticised by both the industry and the EU. Recently, fishing industry representatives have accused the SFPA of misleading the EU and Irish government on Irish fishing industry practices in an attempt to deflect from its own inadequacies and failings. Irish fishers have seen their significant changes to their terms, conditions and quotas as a result of what some have said are misleading reports by the SFPA. The row continues and we will keep you updated on this story. In the north of Ireland, and Sinn Féin are the largest party in the Northern Assembly after the resignation of MLA Alex Easton from the DUP, saying that the party has no respect, discipline or decency. In the week that has seen Jeffrey Donaldson elected leader of the DUP, the third party leader in 2 months, the resignation of Easton means that for the first time in history, a nationalist party is in the majority within a political assembly in the north of Ireland. For almost a century since partition, political boundaries have been gerrymandered to ensure that the nationalist community could never be in a majority. That century-old battle to maintain the unionist majority has failed this week in the 100th year of partition, and tensions are high in some parts of the north as unionists celebrate the 12th of July. It's been predicted that by some that the 12th may turn violent. In international news, and former US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has died at the age of 88. A controversial figure, Rumsfeld was central to the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq in response to the 9/11 attacks in New York. This is despite the fact that there were no direct links between the attacks and those two countries. Rumsfeld, along with President Bush and the Bush administration, fabricated lies about weapons of mass destruction to justify the Iraq invasion, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocents, and some estimate over 1 million innocent civilians through sanctions and acts of war. Two Irish MEPs, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, have been reprimanded by the European Parliament for their part in monitoring the Venezuelan and Ecuadorian National Assembly elections in 2020 and 2021 respectively. An NGO in the EU calling itself European Platform for Democratic Election accused the MPs of discrediting official election monitoring by the EU. Daly and Wallace have said in reply that they were clear from the beginning that they were not election monitoring on behalf of the EU. The EU's attitude to Latin and Central American elections has become increasingly extremist, biased and unhinged over the last decade, with official recognition of non-entities such as Juan Guaido in Venezuela last year, only to have to unendorse Guaido when the position became increasingly absurd. The US government has seized and shut down access to scores of Mideast and Eastern news stations, including the popular English-language Iranian station Press TV. The US government also took over the domain name of the news website Palestine Today, which reflects the viewpoints of Gaza-based groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Bahrain's La Loi TV, a channel run by opposition groups with offices in London and Beirut, was also seized by the United States. The Iranian state broadcaster has said that the United States, along with Israel, is trying to repress freedom of expression and the revelation of crimes by both parties in the region. Last month, Israeli forces bombed the building used to house world media broadcasters in Palestine, taking out much of the media in that region in doing so. And finally, in news that is both national and international, Donegal TD Thomas Pringle raised the matter of Irish UN missions in Mali this week, and it didn't go down too well with Simon Coveney, Minister for Foreign Affairs. Have you got that video there, please, Stephen?
Because I don't believe that Irish troops should be there putting themselves in that position on behalf of French colonial interests. What's the relationship that Irish troops have with the French forces that are operating in Mali at the minute, who've been involved in a couple of very controversial incidents? Over 20 civilians were killed at a wedding that was bombed by the French forces. Is it not the case that Irish troops went there to train Malian troops in order to free up French soldiers so they could go out and kill civilians? The conflict in Mali is part of a wider conflict that takes place across a number of countries. Do we know whether Irish troops actually go across borders and into other countries neighbouring Mali as well in pursuit of their remit? And I just wonder if you'd comment on that.
Whether it's Irish soldiers, whether it's Germans, whether it's French, or many other EU peacekeepers, we are in a dangerous and difficult place to operate, and we were lucky that nobody was killed last Friday. And I think we should show a little bit more respect, Deputy, than what you have shown, quite frankly, today in terms of your comments in relation to French troops.
I think that nobody should question why we're there. We should just accept it. We should just accept that we're there. Is the French troops part of the MINUSMA mission? Are they part of it? Mali is a former French colony. France are they're pursuing their own colonial interests. There has been attacks, and that attack that you mentioned last night is worrying, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I don't believe that Irish troops should be there putting themselves in that position on behalf of French colonial interests, because that's really what's happening here. And what about the French troops that attacked a wedding in Mali there and killed over 20 civilians? What about the French troops that attacked, shot a civilian and buried him in the desert where they shot him? What about that? And what impact do those actions have?
You can see that Thomas Pringle didn't actually get an answer to any of the questions from our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Coveney. In fact, he deflected from answering the questions by faking insult and faking a reverential position towards the UN soldiers, which of course everybody respects, everybody's life. But the questions still have to be asked about French and Irish participation in Mali, and is that part of a wider imperialist project? that's all the news that you won't see on TV this week, folks. We actually have so many things that I wanted to cover on that. We may have to extend this next week and do an extra few minutes on it because there's so many news stories that are relevant. And every week in the comment box, I see people saying, well, why didn't you cover this? Why didn't you cover that this week? It's hard to cover everything. If you're liking the show, if you're liking this alternative media, please give it a share, tag a friend, try to get them to watch it and share it out now if you can. And throughout the show every so often, put a comment in the comment box, ask us a question, whatever you want to do, but do anything that you can to create activity while the show's playing so that we can increase our audience. We don't have any big money behind us, just big hearts. So please do that for us. Anna Kavanagh is going to be talking now to Mattie McGrath, TD, about one of the biggest issues that to hit Ireland and the world in the last 2 years, and the main issue this week in relation to it, which is vaccine passports. So I'm going to pass you straight over to Anna and Mattie.
Thanks, Finbar.
Good evening. The Rural Independent Group held a press conference earlier today calling for an independent inquiry into the government's handling of lockdown and the COVID crisis. And joining us tonight on Double Down is leader of the group, Deputy Mattie McGrath. Mattie, you're very welcome to Double Down, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Will be kissing top off the road, Hannah.
Mattie, just to begin, to let our viewers know a little bit about you, I have to say that sadly you don't make the news headlines very often. We don't hear very much about you in mainstream media. So for people who are not really on Facebook or on social media, how long have you been serving the people of Tipperary?
Well, I was first elected back in 1991 to the county council, but then I was back as a full-time councillor since 1999. I'm a TD since 07, elected as Fianna Fáil TD. Didn't agree with the bank bailout or the bank bailout, or indeed the so-called bank, funding that they gave us. I called it a clean-out, really, and I voted against it, and I lost the party whip. And hence I'm independent, elected since 2011, and enjoying that freedom without the monkey of a whip on my back, party whip.
So you're a man then who has shown yourself to be a man of principles, that you actually, left Fianna Fáil and because you've taken a principled stand on the banking issue. So,
just to clarify that, to be honest, I voted for the bank bailout at the request of the late Brian Linehan and Michael McGrath, now Minister for Public Expenditure, but I regretted it, and it was the biggest political mistake of my life. I voted against the so-called, funding that came afterwards, and it was a daylight robbery. We got money from the IMF for 2.9%. We paid 6% plus to our so-called friends in Europe. Those people that had shoveled the money in here when they knew the situation was going to implode, and they were all, as well as being bailed out and repaid, the main bankers in Germany and France and everywhere else, they also had bonds to cover that lending. They were never even called in. So we were doubly wronged.
Okay, so back to the COVID crisis, and you have come out yourself in a personal capacity this week very strongly against the news that the government is going to introduce a COVID passport, a COVID vaccine passport, in order to access indoor dining and drinking. Why are you so annoyed about this proposal, Mattie?
I've described it as a kind of form of apartheid. It's going to be a social apartheid, actually, where people want to go out, not only for a drink. It's not about drink. It's about restaurants. It's about hospitality. It's about, the whole bus tourism sector, coach tours, taxis, you name it, all the people that are associated with our visitors. And our Céad Míle Fáilte, or the Island of Thousand Welcomes, which we're world renowned for and world famous for tourists coming here and try and embrace and engage, and they get a very special welcome, a Fáilte Speisialta, and they love it. And that's why we have such a name. And indeed, now we're talking about our own homegrown tourism. And I met, I stopped in Ullingford this evening on the way down to get diesel in cabins of Ullingford, a wonderful bus company of long service. And I met the lady there in charge, and she was horrified. They now have bus tours starting next Sunday morning, 10:30, 25 capacity on the buses. And to her horror, to my horror, finding out that all the OPW sites won't take those 25 because simply the staff aren't working, they're working from home, the toilets aren't even open. It's a shocking situation that I'm raising with Catalan Madden. We're trying to recover our industry, but I honestly believe that we're trying to destroy our small indigenous businesses, and that's why this passport is an anathema to me. And make it worse, I asked Thomas Byrne, yesterday, the Minister for European Affairs, was this discussed at the most recent EU Council? I said it was, and it's discussed at every EU Council, both passports and vaccines. And I quoted from minutes that I have of meetings that were held in 17, 18, and very early 19, where we were discussing these vaccine passports. So it preceded and predated COVID by nearly 2.5, 3 years, the plans for this COVID, so-called COVID passport, the vaccine passport.
Okay, yes, and that is true, and I have shared the links to the EU web pages on this. But do you not think it's a good idea that for the control of COVID, and of course, Hans Klug from the World Health Organization Regional Director for Europe has come out today and says that there is a great danger now that this Delta variant is going to take off in Europe. There's been a 10% increase in recent weeks. Do you not think that people having to present a vaccine passport to enter a restaurant or pub is a good idea?
No, because as I said, I'm sitting in the lounge, disused lounge now of a pub that's actually open for outdoor, and they've spent a lot of money, Kinder's Tavern and Care, and indeed Abbey Tavern, and they've spent huge money on outdoor facilities, and there's a number of people out there, not a lot, a lovely summer's evening, enjoying themselves, there's music playing. I don't, because, this is totally unfair, totally unjust, totally a person's medical interventions and medical situation is a very private and personal matter, and normally between the GP and themselves, and in my case with a consultant as well, because I'm a diabetic, and many people might for other reasons, but it's very personal. And what medications are on, what procedures they have taken or undergone, or what conditions they have, is hugely private and personal. And we can't go down this road we've lost so much of our independence. It's interesting that we're celebrating actually the closing of the War of Independence in Tipperary last Sunday, when the War of Independence started in Salahead Beg 100 years ago, 1 year ago now, 101 years ago now, and the fight for freedoms. So our freedoms were that our personal dignity of our body, and indeed, if you go back to the famous repeal the 8th Amendment 4 years ago now, and the horrific consequences of that, the slogan was "My body, my choice." So where did that slogan get lost now? So we have no autonomy over our body now. Of people over 18 can decide for themselves what treatments they take, or what treatments they undergo, or what treatments they may be, are they going to be coerced or forced? This is a total anathema to anybody who believes in the proper civil liberties and rights.
Okay, so you, along with your colleagues in the Rural Independent Group, came out today and you've called for a public inquiry into the government's handling of lockdown. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's not the normal public inquiry which the governments here in the past, and successive governments in the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in some cases. People look at the Stardust, look at many other cases. Look at the plant the aluminum plant up in Limerick, and the fight there by families for justice. I don't have no faith in these so-called homegrown inquiries where the usual suspects are brought in, usual experts, so-called experts, and put on these inquiries, and they get the desired answer, and the truth isn't sought. I believe we needed a whole truth and reconciliation. We need a whole truth independent inquiry from abroad, outside of this country, that are wholly independent and would give us the real facts of how we handle the COVID. I was called into a meeting as leader of the group at the 12th of March, I think now, 2020. I literally staggered out of cabinet rooms that day with the ferocity and with the fear and with what had been told to me by Dr. Hoolan and his team. And of course I believed it, and I was worried. And actually I was telling my friends and colleagues that weekend they thought I wasn't feeling the best, but those predictions were wildly overstated and inaccurate and didn't prove true. Thanks to a lot of the frontline workers and people and the public who paid enormous sacrifices to prevent the spread of this virus. But and since then, NPHET have come up with month after month, literally, for the 15 months of different predictions, who all of them have proved to be wildly inaccurate. So I all the time said we needed to expand NPHET, even though there's 40 on it. We have no business people on it. We have no community people on it. We have no mental health people on it. So it was a cabal, I call it. And then the fact that they were going out there day after day or week after week with press conferences, either before or shortly after the government did. A job of any advisory body here to advise the government is to give advice. The job of the government is to govern and take responsibilities holistically for the greater good of the people. And the amount of people now, hundreds of thousands of them who had delayed diagnosis, misdiagnosis, and sheer neglect and inability to get into a GP. You can't get near a GP. My GP now, you ring and you're an hour waiting on the phone because it's a big business, but they're totally taken up with vaccines. They don't want to see you. They don't want to see you or talk to you. They might talk to you on the phone, but you'll wait maybe 40 minutes. You're in a queue of calls. And all GPs have nearly gone the same, except a very small few. So you're then left with a situation of fending for yourself, really. And it just is gone one-sided to deal with COVID, with the sheer abandonment of all other services, orthodontic treatments, scoliosis, mental health. You can't get a consultant. We don't have a bed in Tipperary. Cancer diagnosis, cancer growing inside people, and they can't get into appointments and are waiting 12, 15 months. I see appointments now put back for 2 years. And this is shocking. So the government has a duty to look after all citizens equally, and we have to deal with COVID, certainly yes, but we have to deal with all the other health issues which have been abandoned completely. And when I saw the figures, when I saw this drift feed coming for the last 10 days about the hospitality sector opening, I knew it was doomed, because this is the choreography we have now. We have Roland Glynn or Dr. Hoolan or many others, and some government ministers run out with stories, and hey presto then. There's no way to treat business that have spent a fortune, closed down the last 15 months, used up all their savings and life savings and family supporting them, and now having a deep deep cleans of the premises. They have upskilled their staff and trained them on COVID, and some of them are coming off COVID and had training days. It all happened next Monday, and this Monday, Tuesday, the whole lot pulled from under their feet. It's a terrible way to treat respectful Irish businesses who have been destroyed. And all the while, the big conglomerates, whether they be big supermarkets or the Googles or whatever else, or Amazon, have made millions in profit. And I might throw into the mix RT, who are languishing in debt while I'm in the Oireachtas, and I've been on the communications committee twice. And now they're in profit, and they've done profit in the tune of 5 million thanks to COVID. Someone needs to ask questions here, and thank you and Finbar for giving the real news. You said to me, I don't make the headlines. I used to make the headlines in RT quite often, actually. People often said it to me, but no. RT has been totally 100% biased, and anybody with a contrarian view, anybody, the medics, no matter what they were, scientists, they were banished and ridiculed. And indeed what Claire Byrne did to a lady one day, she was on, and did a pre-record, and like what you're doing now, and then before the pre-record, which he had adjusted, obviously, and sent it, I'm sure, pronounced it as lies. Disgusting journalism. Shameful. If a person would be treated like that, for me, I'd be both standing aside the gates picketing, because it's shameful that the national broadcaster, and it's interesting now that we're doing a review and the bill clamoring for review, the money that RT are getting from the television license and everything else. I know thousands of people, literally, I definitely know hundreds and hundreds who've stopped paying the license because of the biased lack of investigative journalists. They should be ashamed to call themselves journalists, because they don't ask any questions.
Okay, well, I have to say that in their defence, that RTE is not a homogeneous organisation. There are some journalists in RTE doing fantastic work, and there have been some fantastic programmes put out by the Primetime Investigates team. So, yes, but I do take
Anna, I
your
beg to
point.
differ with you. I haven't seen them. Maybe I missed them. I haven't seen them. I did see where they were investigating big companies like CRH and others over the past, and then they just walked away from it. I did see they were interested in investigating the situation in Limerick, and they walked away from it. So what's this all about? I mean, either they're independent television experts, and there are many good people in RT Costa. It's a huge organisation. But I mean, this has been hook, line and centre, COVID, dissemination of fear and intimidation of the public from 6 in the morning till 12 at midnight. And George Leonid has found a new vocation, a failed politician, and now his vocation and badge of honour is that he's putting fear into every man, woman and child and this land.
Well, I suppose, people themselves have to take responsibility.
Yes.
I do firmly believe that we cannot blame RTE if people are going to sit down night after night after night and just allow themselves to absorb all of that fear and not go and do their own investigations.
All they want is balance. A bit of balance, really. But why won't they put Mattie McGrath on? Why won't they put Dolores Cahill on? Why won't they put Dr. Morrissey from Limerick on? Joe Duffy put him on one day and tried to destroy him. Why won't they put on, take the independent side, why won't they put on the Nobel winning founder and developer of the PCR test, who has stated that it is not, was never meant to be used in testing for these kinds of situations? Why won't they put them on? I mean, they have a duty. They're getting massive funding out of the TV television license, and they're getting massive funding from RT and it's subvention after subvention, and they become spokesperson for the government and effort. Full stop.
Okay. So I suppose our time now is running out, as it were, Mattie, and there's a few things that I want to run past you. First of all, there is some confusion at the moment over whether confirmations and communions are going to go ahead. I know that many parishes across the country had communions and confirmations lined up for this week and the following weekend, and now there is I don't think there has been an official statement from government yet, but
there has.
Oh, there has.
There was no statement in Taoiseach Micheál Martin's the other day in his press conference. There was no word on any of the official websites. There was nothing in writing. My own parish priest, Father Michael Toomey, and Bishop Alphonsus Cullinan said they were going to go ahead. There was no clarity. But the Taoiseach at the Tánaiste, obviously, glibly said that they were all stopped. There was no to back it up, but about 4 o'clock yesterday evening, in the middle of the Bishop of Waterford, Alphonsus Cullinan had a meeting with his brother priests, and in the middle of it, the confirmation came through from the government website that yes, they were in fact banished. And at a briefing yesterday evening, which I attended with Dr. Houlihan and Minister Donnelly, Dr. Houlihan was at pains to say that the fact that confirmations and communions weren't even discussed with the government, so the government can't blame Neffet for this one. It's a direct attack that both Micheál Martin and more so Tánaiste Veralca have against the churches, and all churches and faiths, but more importantly against the Catholic faith. It's shocking that they decided this with no request, no discussion, no debate. And that's what Dr. Houlihan said, it wasn't discussed. So Taoiseach Martin may pony up here and take responsibility. He has banished, and I have a friend, Owen Byrne, who's looking forward to his confirmation was going to happen next week. This is the fourth time being postponed now, and many other families who want the sacraments for the young people, and they're disallowed to get them. And thankfully, we have the masses back and services, and there's 50 can attend, or pods of 50. So confirmations were being managed by the teachers and the board of managers and the parents. They were going to have different classes and different groups and classes, and they were going to have them in segregated at different times, and now it's all banished, and it's shocking. They'll have to, if they want to have them now, they have them at the mass talks like in the penal days. Oh no, and this is a direct decision by government, not on the instruction of Neffet.
Okay, that's very interesting point. A very interesting point that Dr. Houlihan is not involved in that decision. In
fairness to him, I'll defend him where I have to. That's what he told us. He had nothing got to do with it.
Okay, that's great. And finally, Mattie, I know that you have a huge, huge love of music and dance. I know that your family are very involved in the Irish trad music scene. And we have the terrible case of musicians now who have been out of work since March 2020. And I do know from speaking to a number of them that they are really, really struggling at the moment. Their livelihood has been wiped out and there doesn't seem to be much of a prospect of it being restored. Do anything about that?
Part of our very being, and in art and the Troubles, I was often in very dangerous places in the Troubles, but music always broke down the barriers. It didn't matter whether you were from the Loyalists or from the Republican traditions. The song, the dance, and indeed, the tunes broke down barriers, and that's recognised all over the world in many conflicts. Music does, and the devastation that's in the music, not only music, but music and dance. And we're more involved in the dance side of it. I have a niece who was a dancing school, and my daughter was heading for the world champions, Irish dancing. They were pulled, they were cancelled as well. But what I'm trying to say to you is not only them, but the background men, the man in the van, the sound man, the lighting man, the acoustics managers, all of them, they're devastated. I've heard stories of people who've sold their vans, who've sold their guitars, who've sold their equipment. They haven't got a penny, many of them. And even then, they were over 65, got nothing. The real problem was you had to have a rateable premises to avail of most of the schemes. Most of these people operated out of their living room or out of the van park beside the house, and a very valuable van, and they had mortgages on them, and they have been destroyed. But what's so sad about this, last October, late September, early October, 50 million was announced, and only 1 million of that fund has been dispensed yet. It's a shocking indictment on the civil servants, actually, the public servants that are administering this. Same now with the OPW sites, they're not up and running. They can't take half a coach tour. I mean, who's cutting who's time that the civil servants and the public servants and OPW officials dusted themselves down, because they weren't at the front line at all. They, like me, got our full wages all through the pandemic, so they haven't been affected in any shape, make, or form. And they need to dust themselves down now and cop on and open the toilets for a bus tour, open the buildings, that's wonderful sites that we have like Clonmacnoise and many other, and allow the tour groups that are willing to pay the price to go in, and the bus companies, and allow them. So dust themselves down, shake off COVID. We have to live with COVID and work with it, get back to work. And the whole public service is the same. To get an answer now from any department is nearly like trying to meet the man on the moon. And it was bad enough before, the lack of accountability and respect for the public. They are public servants after all, as I am. I talk to all, I'm a messenger of the people. It's their duty. And they need to pony up here, get back to work, and cut out the nonsense and serve the people with their duty.
Okay, well, that is an absolutely excellent point on which to finish our chat this evening. I do know from looking at the screen that you have been in shadow some of the time, but our viewers will have to understand that Mattie is actually en route from Dublin to Tipperary, and he pulled in to a public house where he's known, and they have set him up. So he's not in the studio, and the reason why at times his face is in shadow.
And I want to thank the Kendrick family and their staff here for looking after me. And that's what pubs do. People give out about pubs. They look after every kind of, whether it's a funeral or wedding, whether it's a fundraiser for a sad case or whatever. They're the first people to do it. And they're being banished from society by government and effort.
Mattie, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Really grateful, Steve.
Yes.
I have to unmute there, folks. Sorry about that. Thanks to Mattie McGrath for taking this time out this evening. Hopefully himself and other independent rural TDs will come on to the show into the future. They're very welcome to talk about any issues that are highlighted in Ireland today. Just in relation to the music and the dancing, just before this whole COVID business struck, I was really getting into Cayley dancing.
Napoleon Limney, the Walls of Limerick, or Roddy Marchin. Great.
Oh, just fantastic. There was about 10 that I was learning in this group in County Meath. That all stopped, and I always wondered to myself, it was mainly older people that were involved, some younger, and to me, it was a source of social activity and connectivity for them, but also a source of physical health giving exercises for them as well. And I, as a younger person, was really enjoying it. So please God, we're going to get that back soon.
Well, can I just say, the McGrath School of Dance, like many more schools of dance, young people from 3 and 4 starting make rink dancing, and there are hundreds attending those. So it's alive and well if it's allowed to flourish. So, and it's good for the mentality as well, good for the fitness, physical health, mental health, and for everything.
And for myself as well, because I never laughed and enjoyed. And no matter what pride you have, you need to leave it at the door and come out and just dance on the floor. And that's
around the house and mind the dresser.
That's the way to do it. And in relation to RTE, they did have a good program a couple of years ago, a nature program with this fella that was going out sitting with seals. But that's about it as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Agreed.
Okay, folks. Thank you again, Mattie McGrath. And we'll be coming back to Anna Kavanagh for her news and views after our next segment.
Thanks a minute.
Thanks, Mattie. Thank you. Yesterday evening, Professor Josep Costa from Catalonia. He was the former vice president of the Catalan Parliament. Irrespective of what your views are with regards to the Catalan independence movement, which is a separatist movement trying to create independence for a region in northern Spain called Catalonia, which includes Barcelona in northeastern Spain. They've been trying to get independence for quite a while now. There was a democratic referendum held in Catalonia in 2017, and the Spanish authorities came down with military force on that referendum, but it still went ahead, and it produced a resounding vote in favour of independence for Catalonia. Since then, there were elections only a few months ago in Spain, which returned over 50% of the elected deputies that were returned in the Catalan region were in favour or are in favour of independence. Since 2017, the political leaders, elected political leaders of Catalonia have been imprisoned or have had to flee Spain and hide in other European countries. This week, those prisoners were released, but the charges against them and the other political representatives in exile have not been lifted. So I spoke to Professor Josep Costa about that. So Stephen, if you could please run that interview for me. And if you're enjoying the show, folks, please give it a like and give it a share. I'd like to welcome Josep Costa onto the show, Professor Josep Costa from Catalonia. He is the former vice president of the Catalan Parliament and has been central in the campaign, or the recent campaign for Catalan independence, which culminated in a referendum in 2017, after which the Spanish state, a referendum on independence, after which the Spanish state came down very heavily using violence and criminalising the Catalan leaders themselves, with a number of leaders, I think 9 were imprisoned and numerous other leaders in exile. There have been some changes over the last week in the status of those prisoners. Josep is going to fill us in and bring us up to date on what's happening in Catalonia. And also I'm going to ask him at the outset for the justifications for Catalan independence, so that anybody who maybe isn't fully aware of what's happening in Catalonia can get a little bit of background as well. First of all, Josep, thank you for coming to the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. I've asked you how the weather is over there, so I won't ask you again. Before we get into talking about the status of prisoners, the Council of Europe and things like that, first of all, could you just tell our viewers what is the background to the Catalan independence movement and what are the main reasons why the Catalan people seem to be seeking independence?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a long history behind that. Almost any constitutional crisis in Spain, or even the civil war in the 20th century, has something to do with Catalonia not being accommodated in the structure of the Spanish state. There's a saying that explains the relationship between democracy and autonomy for Catalonia, that says that whenever there's been democracy in Spain, there's always been a strong demand for autonomy in Catalonia, and a lot of obviously resistance to the centralized state that was imposed upon everybody in Spain. So effectively, the demand for autonomy has always been there. And then in 2010, something happened that effectively convinced the majority of Catalans that there was no room for autonomy, at least for the kind of autonomy that most Catalans would want within Spain. So a lot of political parties, political leaders suddenly decided enough is enough, and we're going for independence, full independence now, because we had enough evidence that we'll never have the kind of autonomy we'd like within Spain.
And just without getting too much into it, because I know it's complicated, what kind of autonomy are you talking about? Are there particular practical issues that are just not reconcilable?
Well, in fact, although the Spanish propaganda tends to say that Spain is a very decentralized country, in fact, it's not. And the legislation is highly centralized in the Spanish Parliament. So Catalonia effectively has some autonomy to pass laws as long as they don't contradict the Spanish laws. But if you want to pursue objectives or implement policies that are against the interests of the central government or the central institutions, then the natural consequence of that is that the laws are always going to be overturned by the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court has made a very restrictive interpretation of the autonomy of Catalonia in terms of adopting its own legislation. And indeed, Catalonia has a lot of spending power in the sense that it sends the checks to a lot of people, but in the end, it has very little ability to decide what that money is going to be spent on.
Okay, so,
and also obviously there's a lot of controversy as to how much money should Catalonia get out of the common the common budget, right? And it's undisputed that Catalonia contributes far more than it gets from the budget, from the Spanish budget.
Right. Okay. So there's a historical, cultural aspect, and then there's also those practical aspects that reflect economy as well as concepts of independence, I suppose, if you want to put it like that. The response of the Spanish state after the referendum shocked the world. And although excuses were made by some governments about it, I think the majority of people, when they saw the response, they were quite shocked and appalled by it. Did you and your fellow colleagues expect the violence and the application of criminal law as happened?
Well, we had considerable number of threats before it happened, particularly about the use of criminal law. I mean, the fact that we might get a response in terms of criminal actions, that was fully expected. I guess what a lot of people didn't expect was such degree of incompetence, because I mean, the fact that they didn't find a way to stop the referendum then resulted in this violence in the streets with desperate police officers going around and hitting people because they were trying to seize the ballots and seize the ballot boxes, and it was all obviously impossible when it was all deployed. But that was the result of their own incompetence in terms of getting to seize the ballot boxes and the ballots before they were deployed, which was their main objective beforehand. And in the end, obviously that created a very bad impression in the world. But I mean, we knew, we were perfectly warned that they would use every means available to them to stop the referendum from happening. And obviously we knew that if we didn't achieve independence right away, that we would face severe repression. At the time, you may remember, some of the viewers may remember, we already had a president who had been on trial and convicted of contempt of the Constitutional Court as a result of holding a non-binding consultation in 2014, just less than 2 months after the Scottish referendum on independence. And so that non-binding consultation that took place in Catalonia in 2014 already was criminalized, and the president was banned from office as a result of that event.
Okay, and so the recent news over the last week is that the prisoners have been released. Could you give us some more information about that? Have you been talking to them? How are they after their experience?
They are all over the place now. They've been on TV giving interviews. They've been in the Parliament. They've been the headquarters of the Catalan government, and obviously they are happy, obviously, that they have been released. At least they seem to be like they were released on bail. They're not fully free at all. I mean, they've made this clear many times. They got a partial pardon. It was not amnesty or a full pardon at all. They remain banned from office, so none of them can run for office or stand as candidates in any election in the next 8, 9, 10 years. So they are still banished as politicians, and obviously there are disputes brought to the Supreme Court as to whether this pardon was legal or not, and the right-wing parties in Spain are making like a strong battle against this situation. They're trying to reverse it, so nobody can be sure that they have been released definitively. They may have to go back into prison in the future, weeks or months, and that's the real situation, really. That this is all provisional. It's like if they were on bail, they have been imposed the condition that they can't commit new crimes, as they say, of the same kind for a long period of time, or else this pardon will be reversed. And obviously, this is all limited to the 9 prisoners. It doesn't affect, the measures don't affect the thousands of other people who are facing criminal charges or other sanctions as a result of being involved in the referendum or in the demonstrations related to it. It obviously has nothing to do, or it doesn't affect the situation of the people in exile. The people in exile will remain in exile, and the arrest warrants against them have not been dropped. They are still in force, so they can't come back. And today,
a lot of pressure was put on to the Spanish government from the Council of Europe. Now, the Council of Europe is not the EU. It describes itself as a human rights organization consisting of 47 member states. All of the EU member states are a part of the Council of Europe, but it's not the EU, just to be clear. In terms of the pressure that the Council of Europe put, was that central to the prisoners being released, or do you think they would have been released anyway?
I mean, we'll never know. We know that Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister, pledged during his campaign not to release the prisoners. That was one of his political pledges during the campaign. So it is, I think it was to be expected that this wouldn't happen because he actually broke a pledge, a promise to his voters. And then the timing is quite interesting, because this resolution of the Council of Europe was first adopted in the Committee of Human Rights and Legal Affairs in the beginning of June, and then voted in the plenary of the assembly last week. But everybody in the Council of Europe, and obviously the Spanish ambassador before this institution, already knew that this would happen. So I think that the meeting that adopted this draft resolution took place before the pardons were announced. Although it was not public, okay. It was privately known by obviously all the committee members, all the Spanish politicians who are represented in the institution. So indeed, they knew that this resolution would be adopted in the near future. I guess they were desperate to stop it, and they couldn't. And so there was a point where they realized they wouldn't stop it, that this resolution would go ahead. And they moved quickly to sort of present this decision to pardon the prisoners before the resolution was adopted. So it was not seen as they're caving into the international pressure. But I think it's exactly what happened.
It does look like it. And I suppose quite often you'll never know, as you said at the beginning, in the background, what was the real reason. I know I did not send you this question, but it has come to my mind, and I hope you don't mind me asking you without you knowing first. But how much energy from the campaign has gone into focusing on the prisoners? And has that, is the campaign itself still moving forward with the energy that it had in 2017, or is that energy going into working to free the prisoners and get some kind of justice for the exiles?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, whenever there is repression, when there is this kind of a criminal response to a political movement, obviously part of the energy is wasted in a way, or at least deployed, fighting against this repression and fighting for the release of the leaders and for, raising money for their families, for the bail conditions that they're imposed, etc. And so, indeed, there is a lot of the energy of the movement that has been diverted to fighting repression. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily hurtful for the cause of independence, because repression has indeed helped the movement get international support and get a lot of attention at the same time that it was obviously causing suffering for a lot of people. So in a sense, I think it's a double-edged sword, in a sense that it diverts energy from the main objectives of the movement, but at the same time it helps the movement get the message across and get more people on board.
In Ireland, especially in the late 70s and the early 1980s, our political prisoners, they really boosted knowledge and awareness about the cause for Irish independence right around the world. And that also happened in the early 1920s and the 1910s in Ireland as well. The prisoners, and sometimes the suffering of the prisoners, is what brought international attention. But there is, I suppose, can be a concern that at the same time, the practical impetus to move forward with the project itself, is that still happening, or is there still arrangements being made, things like that? I'm just wondering what's happening with the actual campaign itself.
Yeah, we're in a new scenario after the Catalan elections that we had in February. It took quite some time to form a government. Although the pro-independence majority in the Catalan Parliament is the largest ever, and the three pro-independence parties agreed to support the new government. So the new president was elected with an overall majority of parliamentary support. That's good news. But at the same time, it's true that the strategy that needs to be deployed by this new government is not easy to deploy. It's not getting I think is not getting consensus in the movement. There's a lot of talk about whether to have some time to explore this promise of dialogue from the Spanish government. And there's also a part of the movement that thinks that this dialogue is counterproductive in the sense that we will not get anything out of it, and it may give the wrong impression to the world and to the Catalan society that the conflict is diminishing in a way, and that we may find a solution within the Spanish framework, which most of us don't believe it's going to happen. But
there are really only two roads to Barcelona. The one road is through a politically negotiated settlement with the Spanish government, which could take another 10 or 15 years of convincing them, or that it gets hotter before it gets colder. And I personally, I would not like to see it get hotter, as in what happened in 2000, the violence. But there seems to be, the Spanish are not moving without something like the Council of Europe coming out with a resolution like that. Just going back to the Council of Europe and the EU itself, in terms of the support for the concept of independence, not the political prisoners or their treatment, but of independence itself, have you had any support from, first of all, the Council of Europe, and then secondly, the EU itself?
No, we didn't expect any explicit support. I think the international organizations are not going to move in that direction. We don't expect, because the complexities of international relations, we don't think they're going to say anything in favor of independence. They're going to say whatever it's said about human rights, about fundamental freedoms, etc. So the issue of independence is a choice for the Catalans to make, and the international community, I think, will tell Spain that their response to our political demand is wrong, that it violates fundamental rights, that it violates international law, but they're not going to say give them independence. They're going to say respect their fundamental rights, and that's for us is enough. We don't need outright support for independence within international organizations, because it's not the way it works as far as we all understand it. It's a matter of democracy in this sense. If we're allowed to run our own affairs, I mean, if we are a real democracy and the voice of the people is heard and respected, we will be independent. And so it's our choice, and we just want everybody else to respect our right to have this choice.
I think going back to the Irish experience in the early 1920s, and in 1916 up to 1920 and then up to 23, there was a lot of work done going to countries, trying to get countries to recognize the state of the Irish Republic. I'm not sure, have you asked any countries to recognize you as an independent state, or have you got that far yet? Or
no, we're not there yet. I think we need to be able to actually be de facto independent before we can get other countries to recognize this independence. So the process begins with us being able to become independent de facto, and then when we have that power, we have that ability, then we can get people in other countries to recognize this independence. So that's the way we understand it. Obviously, we have allies, we have people that support our cause, we have a sympathy in many places of the world, and we also try to foster this movements around the world to support us. But we don't think, and we don't expect, and we don't ask anybody to take sides before we have made the definitive steps.
Okay. Josep Costa, former Vice President of the Catalan Parliament, Professor in Barcelona University, I believe. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Is there anything that we haven't spoken about that maybe you'd like to say, or are you happy with what we've said?
No, I'm happy that I think you prepared a show that will get people to understand what's going on at present. The Catalan campaign for independence is ongoing, even though it's not in the news. Spain has not changed. We haven't changed minds about belonging to Spain. And so this goes on, and we hope that we will prevail and we will join Ireland in the world of nations.
We hope so too, and we hope to have you on the show again when there's any more updates. Josep Costa, thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
That was Josep Costa, former Vice President of the Catalan Parliament. I'm often asked why we feature the Catalan independence movement on the show regularly. And one of the principal reasons is that it's a prime example of a grassroots democratic process and movement occurring right in the centre or in the heart of the EU, and that has been received a particular type of response. They held a plebiscite or a referendum on independence, and they got a military crackdown by the Spanish authorities and were criminalised. And yet the Scottish people can have a referendum on independence, and they weren't attacked and beaten down by English soldiers or anything like that. So it is a reflection of what's happening in the centre of the EU and what could happen if you or I or anybody else collectively got together to try to create genuine and fundamental structural change politically in Ireland or anywhere else for that matter. What we might expect a response from the authorities if we were to do something like that, democratic, but that challenged the fundamentals of the state itself. Okay, that's that. We're going to straight away go over to Anna Kavanagh now for her news and views. Again, folks, if you're liking the show, if you feel that we're bringing you something new, something different, we're not going to ask you for money. We're asking you to like and to share the programme and to get it out there. So if you could do that now and tag a friend and let people know that you're watching and do your own bit to get a new source of news and views out there. And talking about news and views, let's switch straight over to Anna Kavanagh for her weekly news and views.
You're very welcome to this week's news and views, where I take a look at the news that has made the headlines, join up the dots, try to see the bigger picture of what is actually happening in the country. And of course, this week, the news was dominated by the announcement earlier this week by the government that they are going to introduce a COVID vaccine passport to allow people to access indoor dining and drinking in public houses. There has been quite an outcry about this proposal nationwide, and even within government parties, there has been an outcry. The charge has been led by Deputy Mark Sherry in Fianna Fáil, and in Fine Gael, Deputy Michael Ring and Deputy John Paul Phelan said that if the proposal comes before the Dáil, they will be voting against it. But it's unlikely that the proposal will come before the Dáil. The Dáil goes into recess this day, 2 weeks, and the government will probably wait until the Dáil is in recess before the measures are brought in by statutory instrument. There were a number of opposition TDs who came out strongly against the proposal, and we're going to look now at Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Serious concerns about that. If we go back then to the message yesterday, where you are now intending that only those vaccinated can go inside, I haven't enough words to describe my reaction to that, both on a gut level, an emotional level, and in my own brain. It's divisive, it's disgusting, and it's simply unacceptable. And we have brought the people of Ireland on, and they have led us by their example. And now we're going to divide and conquer. It is simply unacceptable, and sense has to prevail in relation to this matter. You've got to stop this idiocy. There are 3 men in charge of the country that could do with some feminine help and some practicality in relation to this. We are all in this together, has to mean something. And now we have a situation where somebody who's going to stop me going in if I'm not vaccinated is probably unvaccinated themselves. The person that will serve me is unvaccinated, and probably all of the staff. And the 3 wise men in charge of this country, who are most unwise on this issue, don't see a problem.
Sam McConkey, Professor of Infectious Disease at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, who pushed a zero COVID strategy for the last year, told RTE's Claire Byrne on Monday morning, "I don't see the hospitalisation rate with the Delta variant being anything like the first or third wave or anything that will compromise the basics of our health service." He says the government should push ahead with relaxing restrictions on the 5th of July. "I think we should go ahead with a cautious reopening on the 5th of July, and I want to see a challenging public discussion about what is acceptable risk," he told Claire Byrne. There has been a huge cost on several levels to keeping the country locked down. Michael O'Keefe, Professor of Ophthalmology at UCD, who is attached to several hospitals, including the Mater, told Ivan Yates that more people are going to die from delayed diagnosis than with COVID. And here's what he had to say.
Screening for cancer, the key issue being get there in time to get the diagnosis, not happening. What type of trouble are we storing up for ourselves?
Oh, a massive trouble, I'd say, with people with severe morbidity and mortality as a result of this. You see, the health system hasn't functioned for probably 6 to 8 weeks in any capacity because of the COVID, understandably. So there's been no clinics, no routine surgery, no screening. Now, some of the patients with cancer, who have existing, are being treated, but people with new diagnoses are not being treated yet. So there's a whole raft of people out there, thousands, and already before that we had a problem.
Do you think it's possible, and I know it's a horrific question, to look at the prospect of more non-COVID deaths?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, deaths. Without question, that's going to happen.
Data published by Public Health England last Friday shows there was 117 COVID-related deaths since the 1st of February. 73 were vaccinated, which means just over a third of those who died were not vaccinated, while 2/3 were. The report shows the case fatality rate for the Delta variant is 0.1%. And bear in mind that this is the deadly variant that we are being warned about on a daily basis. And it's the excuse being used by the government to keep us locked down. That is a case fatality rate of 0.1%. Compare this to the Alpha variant, which dominated last year, which had a case fatality rate of 1.9%. And just in case you might like to know, Eta, Gamma, Kappa and Theta are the variants that are coming after Delta. Meanwhile, the number of people dying from suicide is not being recorded properly, according to Vicky Conway, the Associate Professor of Law at Dublin City University. In a series of tweets last Friday, she wrote, "I sat through 3 inquests yesterday in a relatively rural coroner's court. 2 deaths were by hanging. Both were recorded as open verdicts, not suicide. Not sure if it's out of some perceived sense of kindness to the family or shame, but it means our suicide stats are way off. Both deaths were 2 to 3 years ago, and official cause of death only been confirmed now. That doesn't help with our statistics either. The National Suicide Research Foundation do incredible work in this space, but the reliability of the data they have to work from is questionable." Moving on now, the lack of timely health care was raised by the mother of a child suffering from scoliosis. 196 children are currently enduring years of horrendous pain as they wait for scoliosis surgery, and the waiting list is growing because of COVID. But there appears to be no shortage of money to protect the health and well-being of our TDs. The Oireachtas has paid 1.8 million to use the convention centre in Dublin since it moved out of Leinster House last year due to COVID-19. Where is all the money coming from? Well, the Irish government debt will stand at close to €250 billion by the end of the year, according to the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donoghue, who told a meeting of senior government figures, employers, trade unions and social campaign groups last Monday that 38 million, I apologise, 38 billion has been borrowed to support lockdown. Just an incredible sum of money. Even I am finding it difficult to get my head around. That's 38 billion euro borrowed to support lockdown. It's an ill wind that doesn't blow some good. RTE returned a profit of 5 million in 2020 following several years of operating at a loss. Increased advertising revenue from the government and the HSE in relation to COVID, and putting a sizable percentage of their staff on PUP payments helped restore the station to possibility. And now, moving away from COVID, the centres treating sexual abuse published their annual report yesterday. The sexual assault treatment units noted in the report that 734 sexual assaults were treated in 2020. A quarter of the complainants were children aged 18 and under that, while 6 were over the age of 70. The report shows 9% of the sexual assaults treated were committed by multiple assailants. And that is a fancy way of saying that these 9% of sexual assaults were due to gang rape. Only 2% of the reported rapes and sexual assault of children in Ireland ends in a conviction. And that is a shocking statistic, bearing in mind that a quarter of all of the victims treated for sexual assault in the treatment units last year were children under the age of 18. Debbie McCann reported in the Sunday Mail that a Garda facing 35 charges, including sexual assault and coercive control, was promoted to the rank of sergeant before this was pulled, despite an investigation having been gone into the treatment of his former partner and mother of his child. And details of the alleged assaults on the woman made for horrific reading. The Justice Minister and Policing Authority were given a protected disclosure from an insider claiming that there was an attempt to cover up the 22,595 unanswered 999 calls, and this was reported in the Sunday Mail. We covered that issue last week on News and Views. Meanwhile, in the Sunday Times, John Mooney, who broke the story last December about the 999 calls being ignored, reported that the Gardaí who cancelled the thousands of emergency calls without explanation are still answering the emergency calls from members of the public in need of help. One Garda based at Harcourt Street Square in Dublin is alleged to have cancelled thousands of emergency calls, but he is still in situ. And we're going to take a look now at very disturbing video footage that went viral on social media. It was posted on Monday and it has had up to 200,000 views since then, and we'll take a look now.
Don't touch my products. Don't touch me! Don't touch me! That's actually violence that you just committed. Give me your phone back. What are you doing? What are you doing? No, let me see you. Yeah. What? No, don't do this. You're pushing me. Yes.
Are we not allowed to drink in the street?
Of the Public Order Act, please leave the area. Thank you very much.
Hold on. It's actually insane. This is what I'm saying. These guards are out of control. They're genuinely out of control.
Don't touch my phone. Don't touch my phone. Leave me alone. No, I'm not taking video. Why are you pushing me? You're only just going to make
I'm just watching.
I'm going to make the situation worse.
I know I'm not. I'm concerned for the safety of that black man who seems to be racially profiled.
Racially profiled?
Yeah, because why else is he being targeted? Why else is this happening? Whoa! Guys! What is he being arrested for? Lads! Out of control, guys! Guys, let him alone!
Very, very disturbing footage there, and we are constantly being told by the Garda Commissioner Drew Harris that the Gardaí are trained to de-escalate situations and to engage and encourage people to comply with orders, but there doesn't appear to be any sense of that happening in this footage. And finally, a report in today's Irish Times by Kitty Holland says a third of applications to have people detained against their will in mental health facilities came from Gardaí last year, a situation described as alarming by the Mental Health Commission. Mental Health Commissioner John Farley said the highest proportion should be coming from health professionals. The over-reliance on Gardaí was extremely concerning, he said, and even more so given that it happened during COVID-19 when people who required treatment might have been even more vulnerable. An intervention by Gardaí could have led to additional distress. I want to thank you for watching, and as always, can I make a little appeal to you to share this video and get the news out to a wider audience. And as always, I'd like to leave you with a question to ponder in the days ahead. And my question for you this week is, how close are we in Ireland to living under totalitarian rule?
It's a good question, Anna. I often see people online calling the state or calling the EU communists and things like that, which to my mind is ridiculous to the point of view that communism in effect is the taking into public ownership of all private property and the end of capitalism. I think what maybe people are really referring to is the word used by Anna, totalitarianism, the state control of our lives, both personal and our public lives. And totalitarianism is something that can happen in a communist state, in a capitalist state. The Nazis were totalitarian. The Soviets under Stalin was totalitarian. So, Anna, you're quite right. It does appear that we are moving towards some form of totalitarianism, and it is getting scary. The fact that we had so much news to cover this week and we didn't cover half it, so many scary, negative. You want to come in there, Anna? Come on in.
I do, actually. And I just want to say that totalitarianism doesn't happen overnight. It's something that creeps in by stealth. And I suppose the analogy is of the frogs in a pot of water with the heat being slowly turned up, and it's too late to escape when they realise what is actually happening. And, you know, bit by bit, gradually, the heat is being turned up on us. And I suppose my big concern is, have we left it too late to actually wake up to what is actually happening? If back in February or early March 2020, none of us could have foretold what is actually happening right now. And if there's as much change as brought in the next year as has happened in the last year, you know, it's anybody's guess what kind of a country that we will be living in.
Central to totalitarianism is the idea that the individual should give up their personal freedoms for the good of the state, or for the good of the population of the state, or the public. I'm not sure how much more we can give up, Anna, to be honest with you. My concern is that this looks like it's going to roll into the winter now, and into next year as well, and a continuation of this. So these claims about vaccines, there was, as you covered there, 4 members of staff in a hospital in Ireland who have been fully vaccinated, who have now been tested positive for COVID. So where is this going to go? I just wanted to touch very quickly on a couple of other news stories that we didn't get to touch on, but that we have been covering and looking at over the last 6 months. The Land Development Agency bill was passed in the Dáil today. That's a very worrying development. Again, it appears to be a situation where it's a new NAMA, and we have a situation where the responsibility and the democratic aspect of the responsibility of managing public lands and building housing is being completely handed over now to private entities, and probably vulture funds and things like that as well. That's very, very worrying. House prices, again, another significant jump in house prices over the last 3 months, because there's just no bloody houses available, or homes, I should say, available in the country. Sometimes we say houses when we mean apartments and houses, so homes might be a better word. And maybe to make us smile a little bit, there was a Limavady man, and he was caught with cocaine, a bag of cocaine, and it was found between the cheeks of his buttocks. And he was up in court this week, and he was asked how the bag of cocaine got between the cheeks of his buttocks. And he told the judge, as he told the police earlier, that somebody else had put it there. I wouldn't like to have to do the forensics in that case. We're going to have another busy show next week, folks. We have a debate. We did cover the concept of registration and deregistration from the electoral register. We're having a full proper debate on that next week, amongst other subjects. So join us next week. I want to thank Professor Costa, Mattie McGrath, TD, Stephen Kerr in the background, our producer, and Danny for the work that they do that never gets recognised, I suppose. Join us next week, 9 o'clock on the Irish Inquiry next Thursday. Thanks for joining us, folks.